Welcome to our January OpenNTF webinar. Today we have two great speakers going to talk more about Docker and Domino specifically. My name's Howard Greenberg, and I thought first I'd start off. I know a lot of people are living in climates that are rather cold this time of year, so I thought I'd share a picture from this morning of my bike ride up on the beach in Florida here. It was kind of cold. It was 60 degrees Fahrenheit, about 15 degrees Celsius. So I hope you guys.
You need to share your screen, Howard.
Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Oh, well, thanks, Graham. Let me do that. I was sharing it in the pre-session, where I thought I was. Okay, how's that?
Here we go.
All right, now you see the nice little picture of the beach. So anyway, for those of you who are looking out the window, looking at snow or cold or rain, or cloudy skies, this is what it looked like today in Florida. And I'd say come and visit, but maybe in a couple months when things get back to normal. So anyway, again, my name's Howard Greenberg, and along with Graham Akers, and also we have Jesse, I forgot you, Jesse Gallagher. We're your hosts today on the webinar. And today we're very excited to have Thomas Hampel from HCL and Daniel Nashed from Nashcom, who's HCL Lifetime Ambassador, speaking about Domino and Docker. At the end, we'll have questions and answers. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions and hopefully have a lot of answers. Let's kick this off real quick, just kind of get a feel for our audience today. If you could tell us what your role is most of the time, either developer or admin or management. So we have people who are voting. I'll share the results for everybody. Let's give everyone a minute. And while we're finishing up the voting, I'll get to the next slide in a minute. But we're going to be, as I mentioned, taking questions. And there's a questions pane in the GoToWebinar interface. So please ask your questions there, and we're going to answer your questions verbally at the end. I'll show a little picture of that in a second. Okay, so we have a fair number of people have done the poll. I will share the results so we can all see that. Okay, so it's about evenly divided between developers and admins, with about 12% of you saying management. So good. Okay, I think Daniel and Thomas were planning a nice mixed crowd, so that'll be great. Okay, so as I mentioned, asking questions, use the questions pane, the GoToWebinar interface. And please keep your questions related to the topic on hand today. If you have any other questions about OpenNTF or anything else, please go to our openntf.slack.com channel, and there's a lot of volunteers from OpenNTF who would be glad to help you. Speaking of OpenNTF, we are a volunteer nonprofit organization, but we have two organizations that have been tremendous help to us. One is HCL, which basically has provided a ton of support, helps us do these kind of webinars and contests and things like that. And then Prominic has donated all the IT-related services. So a big thank you to both HCL and Prominic for helping out. Again, we are a volunteer group. If you want to help out, there's a lot of different things you could be doing to help us. We'd love to help. Love to have more people join in. Just come to the Slack channel and say, how can I help? And I'm sure someone will throw out some ideas. So just want to mention the next webinar will be Ansible, which is for going to be held by Christoph, who's an HCL ambassador. And so Ansible is something new to roll out different environments. I personally am interested in learning more about it. So it should be a great webinar. The link's at the bottom, and you just go to the OpenNTF site to get the link to sign up. And let's see, I think we're going to turn things over to you, Thomas. I'll make you.
All right.
Hold on. And there we go. You should be all set there.
I just have to share my screen then and kick off the 4D session, the HCL Domino on Docker deep dive. So again, welcome everybody to this webinar from OpenNTF HCL, and with great support from my co-speaker, Daniel Nashed. Let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Thomas Hampel. I'm the director for I'm the director at HCL Product Management. I'm responsible for the Domino server, the HCL Nomad portfolio, and all things security related. With me today, my buddy and co-speaker, Daniel Nashed, who you may already know from various conferences and webinars he was already giving throughout the many years that he is with the Domino community. Daniel is an HCL lifetime ambassador and very well known in the community for having contributed the Domino Domino on Linux start script. So anything that has to deal with Domino on Linux, he is an expert in that area. And this is exactly why Daniel and me got together a couple of years ago when Docker became more and more popular. And because of OpenNTF reaching out to us saying, well, there is an interest out there in Docker, can we actually have another webinar on how to run Domino efficiently on Docker? We said, sure, let's get into this and let's tell the audience a bit more about what people have to be aware of, what is the starting point, how to get into this topic. Daniel and me realized that not everybody out there is aware of what Docker is and where it can actually benefit your business. So we have pulled together a quite comprehensive slide deck and a few demos that we'd like to present you with. So we hope this next, about an hour and 15 minutes will be an interesting journey for you. Again, as a reminder, if there are any questions along the way, please use the chat function in this meeting tool here. Howard and the team will try to respond and will collect the questions for a Q&A session at the end of this talk. Okay, so with that, let's get into the subject. First of all, a small problem definition of what we all have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, or what we used to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Especially the almost 50%, well, 43% of administrators that we have on the call may remember that, or may contribute by saying the time to deploy a server is really what's bugging them. I mean, when you install the Domino server for the first time, that's exciting. But if you have to install a number of servers and do the same stuff all over and over again, that's kind of boring and it takes time. So administrators are looking for a more efficient way to deploy an environment, to upgrade an environment, and so on. Also, an installation that you have done once, you would like to repeat. So reusability is something that is worthwhile to have these days. Developers, you hopefully support me by saying consistency is what will make your life easier. If you have a development environment that is perfectly able to be reproduced in production and vice versa, you being able to take the production environment into a development state, having all settings consistently applied, that would be of great benefit. And the managers in the call will for sure say, wait a second, my problem is total cost of ownership. I'd like to reduce my cost. And well, time is related to cost, infrastructure is related to cost. So all of these problems, of course, can be tackled. The time to deploy can be tackled with automation, reusability and consistency can be tackled with standardization, and cost reduction, of course, with optimizing resources. And good news, there is innovation ahead, or actually innovation available, which is, of course, you guessed it, the Domino on Docker deep dive session that we are going to do today. So what is the difference compared to a traditional traditional environment. I found an example that's a few years old. This is a presentation that a colleague of mine did, Frank Altenburg from IBM back in the days, created a very popular slide deck explaining how to install IBM SameTime Complete, SameTime version 9, from zero to hero. It was explaining what an administrator had to do to fully populate the SameTime meetings experience. And if you've seen this slide deck, you may remember it had just about 970 pages. So 970 pages of detailed instructions to follow in order to complete the installation. That, of course, is not really state of the art anymore in 2020, 2021 and beyond. So if you have seen the latest HCL SameTime product, the deployment on Docker actually is as simple as, well, get a Docker environment, unzip the zip file, modify the environments file, and run the install shell script. So 4 steps compared to 970. This is a major change, and you realize that from a point of consistency, from a time to market, this is quite a big difference. So in the last couple of years, Docker became more and more popular throughout the industry, but still in the Domino space, we feel that a lot of admins and also developers are taking just baby steps because things can be complicated. You realize this by starting your first steps in the Docker world. All of a sudden, you will be confronted with a number of different logos, a number of different technologies that are being used out there. And well, looking at them, you may remember the HCL logo, you may have seen the VMware logo, but many people just are overwhelmed with stuff like Helm charts, Rancher, with Podman, and all these technologies that you can use. To be honest, it's even more complicated because in this new world, in this cloud native environment, there are a lot more players in this game. There is an overview of the technologies, the vendors that exist out there. It's landscape.cloudnativecncf.io, and these vendors are listed here just to give you an overview on how complex it could be. However, it looks complex, but in fact it isn't. All these elements, all these technologies play nicely together, and the Cloud Native Computing Foundation created this chart to give you an overview on who's playing in what space. In today's session, we would like to clear the sky a bit and explain bottom up what these container technologies are, how to use them, and we'll start at the very beginning with looking at Docker and so just to explain what the difference is between a traditional Docker environment, a traditional machine and a Docker environment. In a traditional deployment where you have Domino installed on an operating system, there is a one-to-one relationship. Like you have one Domino server on one operating system, and sure, you can use VMware, which means every infrastructure has to still have one operating system installed, and then you can install Domino on top of it. We've asked our customers what their typical deployment looks like, and the standard answer is they are installing Domino on a machine that typically has 50 gigabyte to 100 gigabyte of disk space allocated just for the operating system. And this is the case for every single Domino server they have. Same with memory and CPU. They allocate 8 gigabyte for the operating system, and then on top, they allocate the amount of memory for Domino. Now, when you have to do this in a traditional environment, in VMware, for instance, this may take up quite some significant resources. So Docker is different here because it isolates the application in a container rather than isolating the operating system with its application. So the infrastructure footprint of a container is much, much smaller. Just to put this into perspective, the Domino on Docker container that we are going to talk about today has about 1.5, 1.6 gigabyte in size compared to the 50 gigabytes to 100 gigabyte that a typical VM would have. It's quite some significant saving. So let's get into the details. There are some concepts that we'll have to explain, especially I'll have to explain the difference between what a container and what an image is. So in the Docker world, there is an image, and I would like to compare this with a piece of software that you have on CD or DVD. It's a piece of software that by itself doesn't do anything. You have to put this CD or DVD into your computer. You have to install it. And it's the same with images. An image in Docker itself is just the software. But when you run the software, when you start the image, then it becomes a container. So the container is the runtime and the image is the software it's based on. These images, they are organized in layers, or they can be organized in layers. And that allows for further efficiency because any layer that you put on top will just reuse what already is there. Much like putting a, what's it called? One layer on top of each other and being able to look through the layer below. So you can build dependencies on images based on that concept. For instance, in our model that we're going to explain here, we are starting with a CentOS base image. Here, this is the orange layer. And on top of that, we are going to deploy a Domino layer that will reuse CentOS. And Daniel later on will show us some really cool examples on how you can actually deploy your custom application on top of that. For instance, deploying Domino Vault as a Docker image on Domino and fully automatically configure everything. But we'll see that in the second half of this show. Okay, so you understood it's about images, and images turn into containers. Let's look into this in more details. These images, they are organized in so-called registry. The image registry, the most well-known registry is the Docker registry called hub.docker.com. And this is where the vendors of operating systems are putting their images into. Like for instance, CentOS, Ubuntu, Nginx, and others have their images stored in that registry. When you install your Docker host, this is the machine that you either have on site or have hosted with your preferred hosting partner. This Docker host will run a so-called Docker daemon, and through a command line, through an interface, some kind of a client, you communicate with that daemon, giving it issuing commands like docker pull to pull down existing images from the Docker registry down to your local host, because your local Docker host also has a local image repository. So in this case, you see we've downloaded the CentOS base image, and there is another image for Domino. By using the docker run command, these images will turn into actual containers. So this is the runtime representation of that image. And you have probably already seen that these containers are supposed to be stateless, meaning the idea is that if a container doesn't work anymore, you just throw it away and you start a new one, which for Domino is not a good idea, because in Domino, we want all the data, all our user data, to be persistent. So we need a persistent data store. In this case, it's so-called Docker volumes. In simple terms, it's the Domino data directory that is connected to a specific volume, each container being mounted to its specific volume. Now, if you're new to all these terms here, there is an easier way to explain this, especially if you have Domino knowledge. We actually came up with the idea to create a little dictionary to translate these terms. So what I was talking about at Docker image, that is a kind of the same thing as a template in Domino. Yeah, the template alone doesn't do anything, but you can create an application out of it. And the application in Domino is the same as a container in Docker. The volume that I was talking about is the Domino data directory. So you see, even though we are using different terms, these ideas basically already exist in Domino. So that's a good starting point for us to see what we can do with Domino, how we can leverage a container technology with Domino. And as of, when was it, April 2020, HCL has released an official HCL Docker image that you can use. Just download this from FlexNet, and it's a pre-built, pre-packaged Domino server in version 11.01, or actually 11.01 with the latest fix pack. That's the download you will be able to find. In a previous OpenNTF webinar, Roberto was using this image to do his demo with, and it certainly is a good starting point. However, just for completeness, Daniel would like to mention another different starting point. So Daniel, you want to talk about the other one?
Yes, as Thomas mentioned, we have an open source project on GitHub for quite a while. Thomas, I think it's almost 2 years. We started with 9.01 and later on introduced the 10 release, 11 release, and the latest release that I will show you shortly is the Domino 12 beta 1 release. We try to look into different platforms, and we are a sandbox for new ideas and customer and partner requests, and we are supporting different base operating systems on the one side and other runtime environments on the other side. So the HCL container right now is only supported on Docker, but it will be supported on other platforms soon. We are going to use Docker and Podman in the demos, but we have more offerings here, and we have we implemented ideas like automated setup, and you will find some of those ideas in the official HCL image in the Domino 12 version. They took some of the ideas and implemented them into core, like the automated setup that you will see in the demos. And I will show you also in the demos what HCL did in 12 at that point. Mm-hmm. So both are valid images. Our image is used by a couple of partners also for their hosting offerings, because we are a bit faster in getting new functionality implemented into the environment.
Yeah, thank you. In simple terms, you can say this script here that you can find on GitHub is the community-driven version of building a Domino on Docker image. And it's the experimental, no, not experimental would be the wrong word. It's the field that will, it's the community that will define what this image will do and how it will be done. It's where the community is proposing ideas that we are testing out here, and if they are making sense, if they are actually receiving positive feedback, then HCL is looking into them and will see that the concept can be, or if the concept can be taken over into the official HCL provided image. However, more details are going to be provided soon. I think we'd like to show some more logos down here, just outlining that the Domino on Docker script that you can find on GitHub is building an image that our community has already tested to run successfully on QNAP devices, Synology devices, OpenShift, Kubernetes, and of course, Docker, just to name a few. Again, this is a community-driven project, so any community contributions are very welcome. If you have knowledge in scripting languages, bash scripting, and so on, I'm sure Daniel will be your counterpart, so please ping Daniel for finding out how to contribute. Now, Daniel, we were just mentioning a couple of terms that for newbies, for people who are new to this topic, are hard to differentiate, which is Docker, OpenShift, Kubernetes. So these are all runtimes that you have no idea how they relate to each other. So Daniel and me thought, let's provide the audience with a small decision flow for what to prefer for what type of deployment. And we try to really keep this simple. So say you are this little circle here on the left side. The decision flow is a kind of like this. If you want to have a Docker environment, a container environment to do some tests with, what you should look at is Docker Desktop, a runtime that just runs on your machine. We're going to talk about this in a few minutes. Easy to deploy, doesn't take much resources, and really, you're up and running in a couple of minutes. If you're looking into a production deployment that runs 24/7, of course, your desktop may not be the perfect environment. So you need a server, and a single Docker server deployment would just be sufficient for a production hosting. However, stage 3 or level 3, as we called it over here, that is exactly when things need to scale out. Like if you're building a service that might need to have hundreds of thousands of users to be supported, you have to think about scaling. And when you are on this level, then you have to ask yourself the question, how much money you would like to spend. There is just one decision point to make, which is, do you want to spend money at all or not? So Kubernetes is the free of charge entry point here, but there are commercial players like, for instance, OpenShift, Rancher, Platform 9, VMware Tanzu, and many others. Now, let's talk a bit about the details. We are walking through this decision flow from level 1 to level 3. And I think the level 1 slide is for me to start with and Daniel to take over, because I am running my Domino on Docker environment on my desktop, on my Mac OS. That serves well for demos, for prototypes. And yeah, if you have a Mac, this is really easy to install, easy to deploy, because all you have to do is to install Docker for Mac. Like you install any other Mac application, you just drag and drop this to your applications folder, and more or less that's it. So easy to deploy, up and running in 2 or 3 minutes. And it already contains some components that are worthwhile to learn from, like for instance, Docker Compose or a single node Kubernetes cluster. That's already something that comes with Docker on macOS. Daniel, want to contribute anything more?
Yes, and it's a good development environment also for getting our project started, because it is a Unix style environment, whereas the next one that we're going to show is the Docker Desktop on Windows, which is leveraging Hyper-V in the backend and is Windows only, and you would need PowerShell scripting, which is something that we decided not to support in our project. But it works well as a runtime environment. So that's a valid starting point. When you look into this, you will notice that whatever platform you're running, you have Linux in the backend with a Docker host in all of the different solutions, because in the end, it's always Linux, which is the base in any type of hypervisor that the platform has. And then on top, we have Docker. and Docker talks to a command line integration interface, which is the Docker client, which does the communication. So that's a valid environment. I never used that in earlier days because the VMware and Hyper-V didn't work well together. But since VMware version 15, this has been solved, and now you can run both at the same time. A more interesting environment, and Dan spoke about this or mentioned it in the last session. I also use that environment. It's a very interesting environment because you run a Windows subsystem on your a Linux subsystem on your Windows machine, and you can install multiple Linux versions like a Debian Ubuntu or also a SUSE Leap, which is my new favorite environment on this platform. And it's running a Linux subsystem in the backend, and then you can use all types of Docker integrations. You can use the Docker desktop on Windows, and you can also use it in any of the Linux distribution that you include. So you have the best of both worlds. And it provides a single node cluster for Kubernetes and also Docker Compose. We have one more slide giving details how it looks like. You can see this is on my Windows machine. I'm in a Ubuntu shell, and I run my Docker commands. So the next one, this is also level 1. The next one would be you have your desktop machine, you install a Linux on top of that in a virtualization environment, and then Docker is running the containerd backend, like in most other environments, and it will then operate in a way that you have your Linux machine and work with your Linux machine. This is almost the same as the next level, where you put Docker on a server. So you have a hypervisor and put a VM on with Linux on top of it, and then run a Docker server. And that's something that is a small production environment already. And you could get multiple images running on that. And that would be also sufficient, for example, for a small same time meeting server for 50, 100 users. It doesn't scale because you only have each component once, and you really need Kubernetes to scale multiple containers of the different services. But this is already a good productive environment. So next step, Thomas.
Yeah, let's talk about scalability or scaling up, because you just mentioned Kubernetes, or in short, K8S in written or in abbreviated form.
Right. We are not covering Kubernetes in detail, but this is really the next step. And we have just done a workshop where we did a hands-on on both. So if you look into that, there are a couple of distributions that are easy to install. So the K3S is a very small and lightweight distribution that can be installed in like 5 minutes. And this would be a good starting point already to get a small production environment running. I think we can't look into Kubernetes in detail because of the time, but this would be the logical next step when you want to have multiple Domino servers, multiple other servers running at the same time, and it provides orchestration and management of those components. The interesting part here is it's the same kind of containers that you already know from Docker. So you can start with Docker and then take the same images and build the same containers on Kubernetes. The terms are changing a bit. You're not talking about containers anymore. They are pods, like we will see in a minute. And the pods are really what you manage with Kubernetes. So,
but wait, Daniel, my management has decided or wants me to go into a specific product direction. So not Kubernetes, but, well, say for instance, Rancher. Can you explain to the audience what the difference is, just so that we have a starting point?
Yes, the main difference is you can see Kubernetes as the vanilla Kubernetes, which is originally invented by Google and used by their internal services. They made that available for free. And then we have different, let's say, distributions of this having the base on that. And all the different, if you don't want to spend any money and you have a lot of time and you want to integrate all different parts on your own, then you can stay on Kubernetes. But if you are an enterprise and you need different kind of services on top of it, and you need a registry, as Thomas mentioned earlier, on your own in your environment, and you need security, and you need different environments managed together, hosted at different cloud providers and on-prem at the same time, and you need monitoring with all kind of different options, then you will look into one of those distributions, like the one that you just mentioned, and which is here on the slide.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
Or you have like OpenShift, which is, I think, the next slide. And when you start with those environments, I installed OpenShift. It really needs 3 nodes from the very beginning, or with 16 gigabyte of RAM and 120 gigabyte disk. And it doesn't even start to install unless you put those resources in, right? So it's a complete different level. This is what you do when you really want to scale out and go enterprise. And then it's not just a Domino admin task to get this infrastructure running. It will be an enterprise environment, like you have VMware today as your environment for bringing out your VMs. And so you will be just one of the applications running in this environment. So next slide, do we have another slide about that? No, that's it. So that's a starting point.
Yeah, we wanted to provide you the decision matrix and some few highlights of when to go with what level. But just to give it a bit of more perspective, what is the container technology adoption in the yellow sphere? Some examples we put up on this slide. Of course, at HCL, we are using containers to create or provide a more efficient build environment. I think in one of the previous OpenNTF webinars, Dan Dumont was showing on how his build environment looks like. So you can imagine that these containers, Docker technology, can be very efficient for automated product testing, like taking the daily build, starting a container with that daily build, running thousands of tests against that software, and then shut it down, kill it, and provide the feedback to back to developers, so that we can act on any findings a lot faster than it used to be in traditional environments. Another example of where containers play an important role at HCL is the software factory, SOFI, which is an environment where HCL products can be hosted, can be, taken into production. So it's much more like you click on a button and you get the software deployed at an HCL infrastructure for our customers to test drive our software portfolio. There are some more news coming, and probably you've seen demos that Richard Jeffs was giving at the last, when was it? The Engage 2020 opening session, where Project SOFI was used. So behind the scenes, that's all container driven. But Daniel, Factor Y is also a good example where containers are being
one of the big MSPs hosting a lot of users with different services, not just Domino, also same time and connections, and they're using Docker and Kubernetes and containers for their environment. Dino would be another example. We are using same time premium already on Docker, and I have a couple of larger customers looking into hosting their applications on on Kubernetes, and also I work with business partners who also need to test different environments, like bring up all different Traveler versions up one after another to test their environment, their software on the different Traveler versions. So it's not just, as Thomas mentioned, it's not just for production use, it's also for testing. So it's a lot of automation in the backend, and this is really something that helps you to bring your software from test to QA and then into production, and you have exactly the same environment. So I think that's enough for those kind of examples, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So Thomas, what's next?
Yeah. We started talking about containers and how a container can reduce the footprint of your infrastructure down to a bare minimum of what Domino needs to run, so to say, eliminating the operating system, taking resources. However, if you're looking at scaling, there are new problems that are coming up, new questions that are coming up. Like, for instance, the question on how can I actually start a couple of hundred of servers in exactly the same way? How can I automatically relocate a container to another host in case something goes wrong? And how do I actually monitor all of that? Now, this is exactly why everybody is talking about Kubernetes, because Kubernetes is adding another layer on top of the container technology to manage all of this. And this is just a component model of what the architecture of Kubernetes looks like. Don't be afraid, it's not that complicated. But in essence, I mean, Daniel already mentioned it. It is infrastructure here, these Kubernetes nodes. This is where your containers will be running. And each container will be monitored by a kubelet, so to say, taking control of, is this thing still alive? Do I have to execute any actions on it? And then on the left side, there is this Kubernetes master, which controls all your infrastructure nodes, all your Kubernetes nodes. To explain this in more details, I think we need an example. So let's see this as a starting point. Let's say there is a Kubernetes cluster that your company has deployed, and you would like to run your application, say for instance Domino, in a container. In this example here, let's say this application is a REST API of some sort. So this container in a Kubernetes environment doesn't run on its own. It's actually part of something that's called a pod. And the pod can have a label. In this case, it's my app. It will get an IP address, 10.0.0.1, and a port, 8080 in this case. So this is the smallest deployable unit in Kubernetes. Let's go one step further. In Kubernetes, this pod can be embedded in a deployment, and a deployment can actually have more than one pod. This is especially useful when having a high available environment. So you can deploy the same container more often. So you see the IP address is changing, but other than that, it's the same image. And these pods are forefronted with something that's called a service. The service is described by the selector being my app in this case, and it knows, okay, anything that's called my app is where I can route the traffic to. Yeah, Daniel, would you like to take care of the ingress controller?
Yes, as Thomas said, the pods are in the backend and they are labeled and they are monitored by the service, and that's the internal deployment. So at that point, you don't have any access from the outside. So the next level is a so-called ingress, where you can have, this is the way to expose your application to an external audience. So you see here in this case, internally, the service uses port 80 unencrypted, and the ingress takes care of the encryption and also exposes it to the internet. And so you can have a mapping. It's a kind of reverse proxy load balancer approach embedded into Kubernetes. So this works, of course, not just for one application. Thomas already has put on a second service as an example, and you could imagine this can scale up to many different services with many different ingresses. You can have many pods. With Domino, it's a bit more complicated because you have data and you have a server name, so you can't scale completely automatic, but you can build services with more than one Domino server, like having a cluster in the backend of Domino servers, having local data. Each of them can have the same local data, and then you can build services. So I think, Thomas, that's a good example to show what Kubernetes can do and what is different. I think Kubernetes in general would be a separate session. So we should take it from here and then move into hands-on and see what Docker can do after you describe quickly the different kind of components that we have on Kubernetes, because I really like what you did. Thomas came up with like a dictionary also for Kubernetes and Domino.
Yeah, like we started this dictionary for Docker, and now I had to extend the slide to also incorporate the additional technology terms that came up in the Kubernetes environment. So for a Domino admin, this is like the translation dictionary for you. When we are talking about a node in Kubernetes, that's comparable to a Domino server. And a pod is an application with a little bit of a DDM, a little bit of a monitoring on top of it. Or kubelet, the term that I used earlier on, is the same as admin4 in Domino. It's a database that relays certain administrative requests to the spoke server. Kubernetes also has an etcd database that's comparing this to Domino would be the Domino directory and the CLDB-dir combined. And that goes on up to something called the YAML file, which is a text file that describes your environment in Kubernetes. The best comparison in the Domino world is that a YAML file compares to your perfect Domino documentation, which I'm sure you all have perfectly available on a day-to-day basis, right? Yeah, okay. So this is just the technology terms, but I'm sure you're all waiting for a little bit of a hands-on session. So let's switch over to Daniel, because Daniel has prepared some demos and is keen on showing what you all can do with this. So we just have to switch screens. Daniel, there you go.
So let me see how I can find the right screen. I got a different button. Is this the right screen already?
It was just shown.
Yeah, there's no screen. Right now we see
there you go.
Domino Docker.
Is this the Domino Docker hands-on?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so let's get started. So I prepared a couple of demos, and but before we do the demo, I will just cover a little bit about Docker itself. There have been some questions around, and many of you will ask yourself, what's going on with Docker? And let me take away some of the questions that you will have probably later on. Docker is still doing sort of well, but they are not keeping up in the same speed than other projects. They have been the lead implementing that, and I'm really thankful for Docker. Without Docker, we wouldn't be where we are here today. Docker is still a very good development environment, but I might not in future would use it for runtime. So there are other projects like Podman that Roberto was using in his demo. which is what I would use instead of Docker in most of the cases. But again, as we said earlier, it's all about images and containers. So whatever you do, it's all very similar, and we all always care about the image and the containers that we build out of the images. So I'm going to talk about the Domino as the image, how you build it with our environment, and how you run it. But before we do that, here's some news about Domino on Docker, the community edition, the CE edition, which is the only one that is currently really available. The enterprise edition is not really there anymore. And what you should do is when you start looking into that, you should get on the latest and greatest, because, for example, if you move to CentOS 8, the previous version, the 19 version, doesn't work well. So now they have fully integrated it, and it works a lot better. The firewalling issues are gone, and it's a lot of enhancement. No, it's completely simple now to install it. So they came up with a script. You just run a curl command to get a script. You change it and make it executable, and then you run it, and automatically you get a new environment. So after that, you just have to start and enable the system, and then you have the Docker daemon running. With Podman, it would be a bit easier. You just do a yum install, yes, Podman, and you're done, right? But we're going to use first the Docker environment, because that's where most people are coming from today. So Domino on Docker is the next topic. What we're going to do is we're going to install Git. Git is already installed in my machine. And I will show you in a minute how you can download our project and get started. And after that, we will look into how we download the software, but maybe we do the first step first. So here is my environment. I'm already in the GitHub directory. I created a directory, and you just go and execute git clone for our repository. It will go to GitHub and clones the project. Then you switch into the directory.
Can you make the font size a little bit bigger for the audience?
Ooh, I try to make it big already, but that would be, is that fine?
Yeah.
So then we need to switch to git checkout develop, because we have the latest and greatest in the develop branch, and we move this to the master branch once in a while. That's the first part, and the next part is that you would download the software, and we made it really easy for you to download the software. When you look into this directory, we have a build script here, build shell script. You would usually run it, and it will tell you what you need to install. So let's do this here. So I'm running build. I want Vault, and I want the latest and greatest. And I have applied two tricks. One trick is Domino Docker file Domino 12. So I'm not going to install everything from scratch here. What I'm going to do is I will show you the Vault image. So maybe I go one step back. When you say Docker images, you see that we already, oh, I'm sorry. I already have a Vault image.
Maybe that's the right point in time. Maybe it's the right point in time to remind the audience that today the Domino version 12 beta 1 has been started, has launched. So if you have not
and I'm
seen,
using exactly that one.
I was just seeing it. You do, yeah.
So
if you haven't seen the blog post, please. If you haven't seen the blog post, please see hcltechsoftware.com and get started with the beta.
So you see that I have the beta already here, and I built a traveler image also. And what I want to do now is I take the Vault software and build a container based on that, an image on that, and run a container. So what I'm going to do is I run the build script. I use a Docker file that has a reference to Domino 12. And to make it faster, I'm not updating the Linux software, right? Usually you would want that, and the last webinar had some reference to it. So when you take the HCL image, for example, you should build your own image on top of that and update the software. For our demo, we don't care because we want a quick start. So let's start the build. And it says, oh, the software is missing. So it says, this would be the software. You can download it from FlexNet, and it says where you have to put the software to. So what I'm just doing is I have the software downloaded. I put it to the right directory, and now I can run the command again, and you will see it's creating. Interesting. Oh, Docker has an issue. It just worked before. Okay, so Thomas, we have to switch to the next demo. I'm very sorry. This is not the image having an issue.
That's the beauty of a live demo.
The file is gone. The file is gone. Let's take another one. Let's do it without that. Okay. No, that is not there on the machine. So let's switch gears and I show you something different here. So the second demo is I show you how to implement the same thing with Podman. I wanted to show you I tested it a minute before we started, and you saw the image was there. So I wanted to show you that we can run it completely without any configuration. So we take the base image, we take Domino, and then we have Vault running. So maybe we do the Q&A, and then I show you after the Q&A that it works. I will try to get it working. So, but the next thing is you usually run your container with a command line on Docker. And here's an example of that. That would be for a normal Domino container. And because that is something that is too difficult to remember and not that easy to type in, there is something that is called Docker Compose. And Docker Compose is used also in other software offerings from HCL. So at the same time, it's not 8.5 premium, it's 11.5 premium. Uses Docker Compose as well to bring up multiple services. And I will show you how to bring up a single server. You just, and we have examples for that in our repository. You take a Docker Compose file, and that Docker Compose file, I would show you the one that we had for Vault, contains all the information like the environment, the system capability that needs to be set for NSD, the networking mode, the volumes that should be mounted, and actually which image it should be using. This can be used also with Domino 12. And here is the Domino 12 style of configuration. What you've seen before is what we used to have in our environment for our community project, and HCL wrote something into Domino itself, which is called one touch or one file setup. And there are new environment variables that you can define. And there's also a JSON file option that you could also use. It's all already documented. And with that, you can start your own Domino server. Pretty easy, right? You have all the information already in here. And the server will just be up and running in a minute. And I added something in here. I did a little trick. I added the cert manager, which is new in Domino 12 to generate certificates. And I'm starting it with some parameters. And when you run this, Docker Compose, you specify the right file and you say up. So you will see the server starting. It ran before, but it didn't create its certificate. So what you will see is that it's that's creating a certificate. And this is really what we want. We want full automation, and Docker is designed for full automation, and Domino 12 gives you new options for automation. And you will see the cert manager is coming up, and it will automatically create a certificate request for you. So you see generating an account key, it's generating an HTTP challenge, and then you will see in a minute, it's restarting HTTP. That's needed for now, but later on, this will not be needed anymore when Domino 12 ships, from what I heard.
So really,
so it restarted HTTP. Yes, Thomas?
From an admin point of view, this is huge, because remember the old days when you have to set up a new server, then you first have to start the HTTP task. Then you realize, oh shit, you need an SSL certificate. You need to start the keyring tool to get an external certificate purchased and been merging this into the keyring file, then copying the keyring file to your server. These were a ton of commands that you had to remember, and it took quite a lot of time to get it done. Now everything can be fully automated and can be automated in a way that it is reproducible, so that when you install the second, the third, or the server number 345, it will just do the same task over and over again. You'll get a properly signed, a proper SSL certificate. So really from an admin point of view, that's a big, big advantage.
Right, and this was both in combination. I've shown the automatic setup, including automatic certificate creation. This is not final, that's gonna be changing. It's just beta 1 state. And I opened the database that created the certificate, and you see all the details in here. You see the keyring file, and in future, those are also going away from what I heard. So this is really giving you an example of everything running together. And I want to show you another quick example, which is something that I built in the last couple of weeks. Actually, I built that around Christmas time for my own server. It's a brand new container start script. So it's not a Docker start script, it's a general container start script. It works for Docker and it works for Podman. And I've just released it, and I want to give you a very brief introduction to that. If you run Docker or Podman, you should really have a look. We started something earlier, which is the management script, which is part of the Domino Docker Git project. The start script is also part of the project, and I included the Domino container script already in there. So let's have a quick look what it is and what it looks like. And here I am on another machine. I make it a bit bigger for Thomas. So when you have already installed the project, you see that we have the start script in here. And in the start script directory, we have something that is called install Domino container, which will automatically install your container script. I have the configuration already on the machine, but I removed the servers and everything. So what did it do? It installed a new service because Podman is daemonless, and you will have to have a service. And systemd is the right thing to use. Since Podman 1.7, you can actually use a systemd integration. Podman has full systemd integration, and it installed everything that you need. It's not overwriting the configuration that is already there by default, and it has a couple of components that have been installed, and you can actually just run your container in a very similar way as you used to run your Domino server. So when you go in here, you see all the different options. And what I can just do is I go into the configuration, and you will see it's a system config script. And that script, that file will help you to configure everything very similar to a Domino server in normal cases. So it has the volume information, shutdown timeout, which container image to use. And it also contains environment file information, and you could go into the environment file and you see all the details. And here, it's very similar to what I've just shown you before, but this is now fully integrated. And with that, you just go and start your server, and it's starting the server with systemd. And the next thing that you see is that the server is completely started in the background, and you want to visit the console. And the console is something that fully integrated. So we jump into the container, and you will see that's actually a Domino 12 server, latest and greatest, running inside the script. So I use that in production, and I've built that in a way that that you can just use it without needing to take care of all those different things that you have to do. It offers all the different options that you need, including jumping into the container. It tells you what to do to exit, and it has all different kind of options. That would be a session on its own with everything on it. It has a couple of very interesting options also to build your own container based of this. So how much time do we have left?
I think we can do about 5 more minutes before doing a Q&A. So if you have another demo that we can get done in the 5 minutes, then you're good to go.
Yes, I have something very interesting, which is build your own container image. So when you move into the directory where the script is installed, it's on op-nashcom start script. There is a build image directory. And if someone has looked into that before, in our Docker project, we had the management script. We still have it, but we will probably switch it soon. And we have now here something that is even more sophisticated, because I figured out what we had was way too complicated. So you have one directory per image, and then you have a build configuration. In the build configuration, you define what you want to have, right? So, and with that, you could go and and create your own image. So in my case, I define like what is the name of my image. Like in my case, I would say the version is 12 OpenNTF. And I have a from image, the base image. And for the base image, you have to find out what is your base image. No, we don't have Docker, we have Podman. So you go in here and take that name, HCL Domino, latest 12. And you specify the base image here. And then the next step is just you go in and say Domino container build.
Let me underline where this becomes handy. I think this is of special interest to all those administrators, all those partners and developers who want to build an image that already contains some additional templates, some additional files or scripts in the container. So you can build an image that already contains your business app for more easier deployment in your environment.
And this is especially interesting for add-on software. So we have like a subdirectory that can be added for server tasks, for extension managers, and we have an install script that you can customize where we have some logic on the top, and then it's pretty much the same script that we use to build our image. And here at the end, this is the main logic that you have where we install server tasks and extension managers if they are in the install directory. You can build your own health script, and all those kind of things are automatically added. And this can also help you when you want to just build a new image on top of the existing image. It can be our image or also the HCL image. Just for example, if you just want to upgrade the base operating system below, right? So after this ran, and was quite quick because it just takes the existing image. You see we have built a new image. It's called the OpenNTF image. And now I could go and take that image, go into my configuration. I'm typing too fast. So, and then you switch the container image from 12 to this new image. And then you can use something that is called inspect. Inspect usually is something that gives you the information about the container. I built an inspect that does much more. You will see that it says on top, a new image is available, and it will show you the different information about which image, what is the build number, and so on. And Thomas, what you now can do is what we've shown earlier, but not that in that nice way. We use just update, and it will shut down the server. That obviously takes some time because it's Domino. It's not a microservice. And with that, after the server is shut down, it will, when I didn't type that wrong, I think I typed it wrong in some way. It will bring up a new server. So the same server with different.
Yeah. So it's actually very disappointing for all the administrators who would love to spend their weekend in upgrading Domino servers in a data center, because upgrading Domino, even though just the installation of Domino was a quick thing, you still had to do this for every machine one after the other. And now within the container world, it is slightly different. You just specify a new image, and technically what Daniel is trying to show here is the script will shut down the existing server, will replace one image with the other, start up a new container that uses the same Domino data directory. So essentially, you can do an entire server upgrade in a couple of seconds.
So let's do that very quickly again. We do a build. We are on the right image already. So I started the server again with the right image. I mistyped the name of the image because it's now the Nashed image and not the Domino Docker project image anymore. So we completed this build in 15 seconds. We go back to our inspect command, and you now see, and this is what I've been missing earlier, you see the build time of the image of the container, and you see the version, and it tells you the size of the image and everything. And now you can go and say update, and it will just work. So I think that will lead us to the questions, right? So I saw a couple of interesting questions.
There are already a number of questions that were piling up in the Q&A section. But thanks, this was probably the fastest Domino server upgrade we've ever seen. So I think I'll have to hand over the moderator rights back to Howard for moderating the Q&A section.
Yep, I already did that and switched screens. So
all right,
you should be seeing the how to ask questions screen. And at this point, we can start doing some questions. Graham, you got something lined up? You want to go first?
Yeah, we'll start up at the top. So we had a question early on that actually was repeated, but it has to do with the recent announcement by Red Hat about getting rid of CentOS 8 and what our options are for future versions of Linux that we can run Domino on.
Daniel, I think we have a slide in our backup.
Yes, but are we still on? No.
No.
Yes, we are. We are.
Well, you're on. You're not sharing.
Not sharing.
I can make you
just from in the interest of time. Let's just talk about it.
Yeah, but we do have a nice slide about it because we did know that it's coming up. On the technical side, there is not that much changing. So right now, CentOS is built from the sources of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and it takes some time until those sources are available. So we are like a more stable enterprise environment than Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And that's something like, it's like free enterprise beer forever for everyone, which is something that I wouldn't do as a company in this way. So what on the other side, what Red Hat needed was something that is like a pipeline for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And what the CentOS Stream platform is already, not will be, it is already, it's something that is ahead by one dot release of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So it's becoming the next Red Hat Enterprise Linux dot release. And this is something that is not really scary for me. I even prefer having something that is a little bit ahead of the curve, getting newer versions of, for example, Podman and other packages. And it's still an enterprise-grade operating system, and I'm personally not moving away from it at all. But we have to be clear here. It is not Red Hat Enterprise. So it's it has to be seen as a separate platform. And this is where Thomas comes into play. And we have to ask Thomas what HCL is saying about that.
Yeah, and maybe that also would answer the newest question that just came in about supporting Debian Linux for Domino, because we realize that especially the Linux world out there is having different flavors. There are different preferences around the globe on what Linux operating system your data center runs on, and we have we've been supporting Red Hat and SUSE for a number of years and then have joined CentOS. But as you know, there are many, many more flavors of Linux out there that customers want to run Domino on. And what we'd like to do is to change our paradigm on Linux a little bit by saying, you can run Domino on just any platform you want, as long as this platform follows certain minimum criteria, like for instance, the kernel version of that operating system, the Linux operating system, or some specific library versions that you have to have. And if this is given, then you can run it on. However, we cannot test every single Linux distribution that exists out there in the wild. The testing effort would be way too big. Still, the community already knows that you can very well run Domino on Debian, on Ubuntu, or whatever. You just have to know some of the operating system specifics. And this is exactly why I'd like to reach out to all of you, the community out there. So if you would like to have your operating system of choice, your Linux distribution of choice, to be officially documented on how to run Domino on this operating system, please reach out to us, reach out to me, provide your best practices on what you have figured out, like what commands you have to type to make Domino work in this environment, and we'll try to document this on our in a tech note or in our documentation, so that anybody else out there can run Domino on that operating system too. Also, when it comes to support, our intent is to accept the help desk ticket if it is related to Domino. Of course, if you are running a special flavor of Linux and you have a question on how to manage the firewall on Linux, on that Linux version, our support can't help. So we have to make that clear. But I think compared to what it was in the past, this is a great step forward. So yeah, go ahead and please support us in broadening the amount of systems that Domino can run on by just documenting how to make it work.
Okay, that answer was much longer than I expected, and we got a whole bunch of questions. So I'll, but I actually wanted to chime in something that came up in the community earlier this week, which is that Red Hat apparently has announced that RHEL is going to be free for up to 16 production servers. That's something that we can discuss more in detail in the OpenNTF Slack chat for people who have questions there. Right. So we've potentially got an option there. All right, let's jump into the next question and see if we can get through as many as we can in the next 7 minutes. We've got a question about being able to connect several Domino containers to only one data volume. So if one Domino container crashes, the other container can continue to operate.
No.
Say that again.
Sharing a data directory.
No, you can't share a data directory at all. So because it's the same as if you would have two servers running. Yes and no, Thomas. If one server crashes and you bring a new container, but that's a completely different story. So the idea about a container is that a container is like, if you shut it down, it's gone. You only have the data. So so there is no such thing that some other container needs to take over. You just create a new container and you're up and running again. As I've shown you.
The question is more, can you replace? Yeah, I think the question here is more about, can can the container high availability replace a Domino cluster? And the answer is no. That's why the answer is clearly no. Even though Kubernetes and the container technologies provide some great benefits for automation, the basic principles of Domino still apply. You cannot share a data directory.
Including clustering also applies. So you can and should run Domino clusters and make sure that they're not scheduled on the same host, for example, right? So, but what you can't do for sure is have two servers running with the same data directory. It's the same as if you run two Domino partitions with the same data directory.
Excellent, thank you. This one probably is longer answer than we've got time for, but I'll ask it anyways. How do you configure the Docker for Mac network?
No, we can't go into those kind of details about networking. Okay. Networking is a topic on its own. It should be all the same. If the one who asked the question pings us afterwards, we can figure that out. And we will maybe post that question somewhere.
We can blog it on the OpenNTF site, sure.
So networking on Docker is a topic of its own. Next. And it's really difficult to answer without knowing all the details.
Graham, maybe we could need to set up a Docker channel on Slack.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Great idea.
Might be a good place to talk about things like this. So we also had a question about Windows. WSL1, can Docker on Windows be used with that?
That question has been asked in the last webinar already, and I agree what has been said there. Windows is not the same type of environment. So Linux is always the base on all what we have shown you. I've looked into building containers on Windows and it's not comparable at all. And there is no big demand for it for Domino. We had a similar question about in the beta forum about the Windows Core. That's also something that not many customers, I had no customer looking into that. So I don't know anyone doing containers on Windows with Windows as the base operating system. Right?
Okay.
It can be a runtime for a Linux-based container.
Right. Here's a good question from Prashant. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Domino for Docker, can you migrate existing servers to Docker, or do you have to just use it for a new image?
No, you can, of course, migrate an existing server to Docker. All you have to do is to take the data directory into the container. I think we have a documentation somewhere or some examples that we can call out.
So actually, my new Domino container script has an example, and what I've shown you was a data directory that is starting with a /, and that means it is on your local disk. So if you have only one container, you just don't use a Docker volume, you use a physical, logical Domino volume directory on your disk.
Maybe one reminder, if you think of doing that, please look into any third-party software that you have deployed on the Domino server, especially monitoring backup software, because that will have to be part of the container, or you have to revisit the backup concept, the monitoring concept. Again, that's worthwhile worth another webcast maybe, but in general, yes, of course, you can migrate.
And it's easy. Actually, I've done that for my server. I took an existing server.
Let's try to couple.
Next question.
Yep, we've got lots of questions and not very much time. I think what we'll probably do is collect these questions and answer them in a blog and post them up, since we're pretty much really out of time right now. We'll try and sneak one more in. Daniel, a question about your script. Can we use it to configure internet sites and host names and subdomains and so on?
No, because that's something that is not yet implemented directly. You could use our script. There is something in it, but it will be really complicated. Thomas, we could do that with our script that creates databases and documents. I'm not sure if we can do internet sites in a way that would make sense to someone. You have to specify all those fields on your own, and it's almost, it would be really tricky. So if the person who needs that pings us afterwards, we can give you some hints what to do. So, but it's not part of the automated configuration either. But in our image, we have something that could be scripted with the JSON file that we have for configuration.
Thank you.
Thomas, would you recommend that, or would this be too complicated?
No, let's take this offline, and we are creating a blog post out of it, because
Yes.
there are some options. And yes, we have thought about this for a future version of Domino to even automate this part as well. But it's going beyond the time we have right now.
Yeah, we've run out of time. We've got lots of questions that we haven't gotten to, so I think we'll have to collect those separately, and we'll blog them.
So I can just quickly tell you what went wrong on my demo. I recreated the Git. I downloaded the Git directory again, and I had one Docker file, Domino 12, that I created on my own in that repository. So the demo is up and running, but we're too late. We could take it as a closing if you want to. It takes 1 minute to show.
Let's see, that's, you want to show that now?
I could show that right now.
Okay.
Go for it. Bring it on, they say.
Okay, so I need the presenter. It says show my screen. Is that the right screen?
It's the Docker, Docker
yes.
screen.
Yes. So building it is very simple. It's just running for a couple of seconds, and then you have a new vault image. Done in 12 seconds. Docker images, and you see a new image just created 6 seconds ago. It's a little bit bigger than the other one. So let's start this. We are at the Docker Compose. We have the Docker Compose file that I showed earlier with all the details in it, and you just run it.
Up.
Docker Compose up. So it creates a private key that is part of our distribution. So this is not the Domino 12 way of doing things. It's running the Domino 12 beta code, but it's running our scriptable setup for now. And you see it created the database. It says it does not exist, and then it creates the database. You see the server is started. And now when you hit the server, I just need to give it a couple of seconds. You hit the official URL of that server. You will see that we have a full functioning. Maybe we are a little too early. It takes a moment. So you will see a full functioning Vault server. The certificate will not be trusted because it's a self-signed certificate that we just created with a local CA. Now you see I have to trust this certificate because it's not created by Let's Encrypt or any public certificate authority. So it takes a moment, and then you're up and running with Vault completely. You can just start and run.
So what you did was create a new image, deploy that image with a server name of your choice, with Domino included, creating a new server ID, new certificate, deploying an SSL certificate, deploying Domino Vault, including all the settings it needs to run perfectly, and all of that, well, in, well, maybe a bit more than a minute, but you get the idea.
Very cool. All right, well, we're definitely over, so I'm going to say I think we're going to look into starting a Docker channel on our OpenNTF Slack.
That makes a lot of sense, and we will join it for sure.
And then we'll also get the video of this session as well as the presentations, the slide presentations, put that up on opentf.org/webinars in the next few days. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming. I especially like to thank Thomas and Daniel for a great presentation, and Jesse and Graham for helping me co-host this today. Everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you.